Australian Aviation Podcast, the official podcast of Australian Aviation, unpacking the latest insights, developments and issues impacting Australia's aviation sector.
Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. I'm going to start this week with something of a public service announcement. So you may have remembered a couple of months ago, I did a bit of a plea to our listeners and viewers because we have started putting up our content, as they call it now, on social media. And obviously we want to get more views because that's good for Australian aviation. But what it was about more than anything else is petty office politics and petty office rivalry. So we are now owned by a company called Momentum Media, and they own a number of brands, including things like Lawyers Weekly and Accountants Daily and all these other kind of boring industries, if I'm honest. But their most popular podcast, their longest running one, is called the Smart Property Investment Podcast. And I did a shout out to you guys to help us overtake and beat them. And obviously this was in hope than expectation, because this podcast has been going twice as long as ours. Astonishingly, you weirdos have answered the call, and you have answered in extraordinary numbers. We are now not just beating this podcast on social media, we are thrashing it. It is a massacre. I almost feel sorry for them. I have got some cold hard stats. Apologies, I'm using my mobile here. I'm using some cold hard stats here to show the scale of dominance here. In the last 90 days, the SPI podcast got 100,000 views, which is pretty good. Congratulations to them. Nothing, though, compared to the views of this podcast, which got 210,000. In fact, in the last 30 days, SPI managed a paltry 50,000, while we galloped ahead with 110,000. That makes us by far and away the most popular brand in our company on social media. We are yet again, as per usual, number one. I'd like to thank all the people for listening and viewing this. Probably also have to thank my co-host as well, who arguably played a small part in this success, Jake Nelson. Jake, what do you think about this?
Oh, am I talking now?
Yeah, you are talking now.
You didn't introduce me before.
Yeah, because I was
just went straight into it.
I was teeing you up, Jake, to say something about this.
Oh, it's a great result, Adam.
Yeah, okay, I would want something more. I mean, a lot of it is down to you because you do funny videos and impressions and stuff, and lots of bits of witty retorts and things.
We have some good content, as they insist on calling it, to chop up and make into YouTube shorts.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's YouTube is working on making shorts longer, which would just make them pants.
He actually came out of this joke shortly before we came up to the office, so this was like a pre-planned gag he's had going.
Spoil the magic, why don't you?
Yeah, have we got any other shout-outs at all?
Well, we've got a couple of new additions to our fleet here.
Oh,
Adam.
right, of course, yeah.
We have here this lovely 777 freighter and send that Jetstar plane spinning. We've also got this Emirates A380, which you may be surprised to learn is a fridge magnet. But it's by far one of the nicest fridge magnets I've ever seen. And this is all from Emirates Sky Cargo, who held a media event in Sydney last week. And they gave sort of thank you gifts to the people who attended, and these fine aircraft were among them. So thank you to the people at Emirates Sky Cargo. There's also a couple other things in the bag, like laundry bags when you're going on holidays, and like a key ring shaped like an airplane engine in case you need your keys to go faster.
Okay, that's pretty good. Did you ask them specifically for this, or did they?
This was handed out to everyone who attended, basically. Yeah. So that was nice of them, and it means that we've got now a lovely Emirates freighter for our collection here in the studio.
Excellent. So we're not just carrying passengers now; we're also carrying cargo. Excellent.
Well, we've been carrying cargo for a while because we can see over there near you, Adam, the Embraer E freighter. The E190 freighter.
You're such a loser.
With the other Embraer planes. You're here with me, Adam.
Very true. Well, the other thing we have to do a shout out for is, of course, the Australian Aviation Summit and the Australian Aviation Awards, which will be taking place on the 14th of August at the Illumina kind of venue in Martin's Place, not the metro station, above the metro station. The summit, which is being held with our principal partner, Lidar, kudos is being headlined by the maestro, Alan Joyce. He will be making one of his first public appearances since he left being the CEO of Qantas. He will be talking all about how he got the airline through COVID, all the lessons he's learned, etc., alongside lots of other senior guests. And then in the evening, we're going to have this like fancy pants dinner, black tie dinner. If you have been nominated for an award, or if you've been a finalist of the award, obviously you should come along. But even if you haven't, it's a great excuse to come, meet everybody, do some networking, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, go on our website, australianaviation.com.au, and have a look. You can go and book tickets there, and that is being held with our principal partner, UNSW, and their School of Aviation. Go and get involved. Jake, we've got any other shout-outs before we steam into the news and try and talk less nonsense?
I think that about covers it, Adam.
Oh, okay, that just about covers it. Right, okay, what are we talking about first?
Well, we should probably talk about a somewhat dramatic occurrence on board a Virgin flight on Monday. As we're recording this, it is Tuesday, so yesterday. But for you in the future, it will be Monday. It's Monday from everyone's perspective, but for you in the future, when you're listening to this, it will be Wednesday. So let us know what the lotto numbers are like. But on board flight VA1528 from Sydney to Hobart, as it was coming into Hobart on Monday, there was a fire that broke out in an overhead locker.
That's not good. Not
good at all. So that broke out on descent. Fortunately, the cabin crew managed to put the fire out before the plane landed. Air Services firefighters came to attend the aircraft when it landed. They removed a bag from the overhead locker. They believe that what started the fire was a battery pack, like a lithium battery pack, like a power bank, inside this bag in the overhead compartment.
So you're meant to put the power banks in your hand luggage, aren't
yes,
you?
you
not in your storage.
Yes, you are, and the reason for that is this is all under the IATA safety regulations. You're supposed to put your power banks in your carry-on bags because of just such an occurrence. If there is a short circuit or if there is damage to the power bank and it catches fire, you want the crew to be able to get to that power bank and you want them to be able to put it out. Which is a lot easier for them to do if the power bank is in the overhead. If the power bank is in the cabin, not the cavern.
It would be very difficult for them to get into the cargo hold.
Yeah, it would be very, very difficult for them to get into the cargo hold. So that is why you're supposed to be carrying your power banks in your carry-on luggage so that they can be easily accessed. Now, Virgin is asking passengers at the moment to keep their power banks within sight and easily accessible while they are in the air. Also is encouraging passengers to not use the power banks to charge their devices while they are on board. Now, this is not a ban. I think Virgin is currently reviewing its policies on the use of power banks in flight, particularly after this incident. There are some airlines like Singapore Airlines and Scoot, I think Thai Airways, South Korean, EVA Air, China Airlines. They're all among the carriers that outright ban you from using or charging your power banks in flight. So you can use your power banks in flight, but Virgin is encouraging you not to.
Right.
And this is all sort of bringing up, the question of should Australian Airlines be taking more proactive and tougher steps to actually ban people from charging their devices using their power banks in flight. Because newer planes, especially like the A321neos that Jetstar has and Qantas's new XLRs and Virgin 737 MAX 8s, they now have sort of in-seat charging ports you can use to charge your devices. And these have been coming in for a while now. So the question is being, should people be allowed to charge their devices with the power banks if they have in-seat power available, and charging with power banks runs the risk of starting a fire? Of course, the issue, some would say, is, well, a lot of the time these in-seat power things don't work. But it's an interesting question. What do you think, Adam?
Well, I would say first and foremost, huge kudos to the crew. Because can you imagine the panic? And I'm sure it wasn't a massive fire, but there would have been smoke coming out of the overhead.
Yeah, I think there was one passenger that was tended to by paramedics for suspected smoke inhalation.
Yeah, so it was actually probably would have been a decent amount of smoke, right? Can you imagine? Let's just say Ben was on that flight, and God, I wish he was. The sense of absolute panic and shock on board. And obviously the cabin crew would have, probably realised that this was probably a minor fire, but they had to spring into action really, really quickly. It would have been a very, very difficult situation. That they were able to respond so quickly has obviously stopped a more serious situation happening. And again, people don't realise, cabin crew are predominantly there. 95% of their job is for safety purposes. It's not chicken and beef. So absolute kudos to the crew there. And I hope they get a big thank you from Virgin. I have one of these power banks. I always take with me on a domestic flight for my laptop, because actually, if you're travelling for work, having like another charge of your laptop is very, very useful. So I can see that. But I also do think that it's a pretty minor request to say that you can't use it while you're on the flight. If that does cause an increased risk, I think that's a perfectly safe measure. It's interesting because I remember when I got this power bank, suddenly like looking into what the rules were, etc. And it's one of those things where you think, oh, well, it'll never happen. This isn't actually going to kind of catch fire. But it actually shows that these things can go wrong. And it is actually good that they've got the policies there. Also, kudos to the passenger. He probably would have read up on it and made a point of putting it in the hand luggage rather than putting it in the suitcase. Because if it had been in the suitcase, that could have been a much, much, much more serious incident. So that's my views on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and CASA earlier this month has put out some multilingual resources for its Pack Right Safe Flight campaign, which helps travellers understand what they can and can't take on board, particularly lithium battery-powered items. Now, according to Pip Spence, who is the CEO and Director of Aviation Safety, she says that most passengers now carry at least 4 lithium-powered devices. So phones, laptops, vapes, tablets, power banks. When they are packed incorrectly, they can pose a serious fire risk. So spare lithium batteries, and this is a quote from Pip Spence. She says, spare lithium batteries and power banks must never be packed in checked baggage. They must always be carried in the cabin, where cabin crew are trained to respond to any incidents. So if you have a device with a lithium battery, a laptop, a phone, an electric toothbrush, those can be put in your carry-on or your checked baggage, as long as the battery is secured within the device, switched off, and protected from accidentally turning on. If you have a device that does not have a battery, like a hair straightener, you can pack it wherever you like. But yes, as Pip Spence says, packing right protects everyone on board. A single lithium battery fire in the cargo hold could endanger an entire flight. Passengers should always follow crew instructions, including directions on the tarmac and safety briefings on the plane. Safety is everyone's responsibility. And I think there was actually a few years ago, Adam, some incidents where there was a Samsung phone, like I think it was a Samsung Galaxy Note, that was banned from several airlines because it had problems with the battery catching fire.
I do remember that actually.
Yeah, so that Samsung phone was banned from planes. We haven't sort of heard about it. Samsung has presumably fixed the battery issue because we haven't heard of any more, phones spontaneously catching fire.
Isn't that the same make of iPad thing you've got there now?
Well, this is it's the same one. And it's the same thing that I use for my phone. But I would assume.
Sam, you got a Samsung phone as well.
I have a Samsung phone.
So you got a Samsung phone and you got a Samsung tablet. So you're essentially like a walking explosive, aren't you?
Maybe we shouldn't say that if I'm planning to get on a plane anytime in the near future.
Well, I'm not worried about. I'm more worried about you coming into the office, to be honest, and in this podcast studio. So
it'll probably be fine, Adam.
Oh, okay.
Probably be fine. But yeah, so it's an interesting question of should people be banned from using their power banks in flight? I mean, tell us what you think. Let us know. Comment on this video on YouTube.
Instagram is what we're like. The Instagram.
Or
Instagram.
Comment?
Can you comment on Instagram?
You can comment on Instagram.
Yeah.
Comment on this video on YouTube. Comment on Instagram or Facebook, or wherever else. Or email us media@australianaviation.com.au if you like. And let us know what you think of this power bank issue. Should there be a ban on charging or using your power banks in flight, or should it just be strongly discouraged?
It's a bit disappointing because this is usually the sort of occasion where you come up with some kind of pun, some kind of battery-like pun. Well, go on then. I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm not going to assault you with any battery-like pun.
Right. Okay, welcome back. So we're talking about battery fires there.
Yes.
Let's talk about something else. What's next in the news, Jake?
Well, this is something that the Herald actually had this morning, which I want to sort of kind of a semi-feature that they had, but I want to talk about it because it's interesting. So this is data that's come out of Cirium, an aviation analytics company, where according to this article, the total number of passenger seats on offer from regional airports has risen from 18,887 a year ago to 20,145, which is a rise of 6% in the winter school holiday travel months. And it's sort of touching on this idea that regional airports around the country are kind of becoming new international gateways. We're seeing this with Newcastle, with its new international terminal revamp, which is supposed to open in a couple of weeks to months, with the new Jetstar flights to Bali. We're seeing this especially with places like Cairns. Cairns is getting all sorts of international traffic coming in. To New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, Bali, Japan, New Zealand, Fiji, Port Moresby, all of these flights are coming into Cairns, which the Herald has called a kind of super regional airport, which is a pretty swish term. And you've got the Gold Coast, flying Bali, Hong Kong, Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, all sorts of destinations in New Zealand. And it's kind of an interesting trend where traditionally most of your international services, if you lived in Newcastle, currently if you live in Newcastle and you want to fly to Bali, you have to go to Sydney. But soon, traditionally, you would have to go to Sydney anyway. Or if you lived in the Gold Coast, you would have to fly out of Brisbane. Or if you lived in Cairns, you'd probably have to fly down to Brisbane and then up to wherever it was you were going. But now, more and more, we're seeing these smaller regional airports become kind of secondary gateways into Australia.
Yeah, and actually, I know that they weren't flying international flights, but it does kind of tap into Bonds' idea, which was that basically Australia's population has grown significantly over the last kind of 20, 30 years and is continuing to grow. So this kind of outdated idea that these things will never work is not necessarily true anymore. Also, you've got other factors like, for instance, the original Sydney airport being kind of full to bursting. People as well, like during COVID, that maybe moved out of the country, that moved to regional areas. All of these kind of things build up to making that happen. It also just makes sense as well. It makes sense to have more international flights in these kind of larger sort of secondary airports, because why would you travel unnecessarily? I think this is good news because apart from it reducing kind of commuter times, it also brings more competition into the sector as well. And the more international flights we have in total, the better.
And it's something we see overseas as well. We've seen it a lot overseas, especially in America. Smaller airports that are not, your big hubs, your LAXs, your San Franciscos, your JFKs, your DFWs, your whichever. Smaller city airports do get international flights. And it's something that's been going on there for a while. Even if it's just flights to Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, whichever, there are international services that do operate from smaller airports in the US. And I think in the UK as well, you get some services to Europe out of
Southampton, my local airport actually.
And like Manchester and Birmingham and things like that.
Oh, well, yeah, Manchester's pretty big. But it's like a Southampton or Bournemouth, those kind of secondary sort of third tier airports. And now, like, you live in Southampton, you can get a flight to Mallorca, go to Ibiza, whatever, for the weekend, pop back. So it does
which is cheaper than getting a train down to London. Apparently,
it actually is. But yeah, no. So it does make complete sense. But again, it's like when Bonds are launched, they had this philosophy that the way we looking at aviation was completely outdated. That you're almost underestimating all these people that live in sort of smaller areas, and that there actually is demand for these things. So we are seeing that kind of long-term change in the industry.
Now you might get the argument, of course, that it's all well and good for America, where Canada and Mexico are right there, and the Caribbean's right there. It's all well and good for the UK, where you can just pop across the channel into Europe. But Australia's far more isolated. But when you think about it, New Zealand's what? 3 hours away from Sydney, 3-4 hours. Bali's right there. Not too far from Darwin and the north. PNG, Port Moresby's right there. I mean, New Caledonia, where we are in a few places in Sydney. France is closer to Australia than New Zealand because New Caledonia is a French territory.
Yeah, technically.
So New Caledonia is within a couple of hours. So there's a lot of destinations in our immediate vicinity that are within a couple of hours of Australia, sort of comparable to flying from the US to obviously you can't drive from Australia to New Zealand without some kind of aqua car. But they're comparable to flying from somewhere in American heartland to Mexico or Canada or UK to somewhere in Europe. It's not as huge a leap as you might think.
No, and also if you've got this kind of cost of living crisis as people are talking about, it makes sense to have that holiday or that trip somewhere closer than going further afield. So I suppose that all ties into it as well.
And we've seen again this huge surge of travel into Asia. Asian tourism is booming in Australia. People are going to destinations in Asia, and people from Asia are coming to Australia. And Cairns, if we go back to one of our examples, Cairns is a great destination because the Great Barrier Reef is right there, which is a major tourist destination. Far North Queensland, big for tourism. The Gold Coast as well, big tourist destination. So it's Newcastle might not be as well known overseas as like Cairns or the Gold Coast, but it is the Hunter, and the Hunter is a major wine production area.
Yeah, and it's also good for these areas as well, because if you're somewhere like Newcastle, which is actually stunningly beautiful, probably doesn't necessarily have the rep of more famous sort of cities in Australia. This is a very, very good thing for them, because if you get those international flights coming the other way, you get people that kind of discover and spread the word of these kind of places. And there's a lot of areas in Australia just generally that I think are like staggeringly beautiful, but don't necessarily have the worldwide rep. When I went to the Blue Mountains for the first time, it's stunning. It's absolutely staggering. And yet around the world, nobody's necessarily heard of that. And there's places scattered all around Australia which are absolutely incredible. So it does make sense as the world kind of becomes smaller that we'll see these things happening.
And it'll be interesting as well, because Jetstar Asia, which is sort of winding up at the end of the month, I believe, but it had flights from Singapore to Broome. So it'll be interesting to see if some more places like Broome, if something steps in to fill up the gap that Jetstar Asia left behind, because Broome and the Kimberley region are very, very beautiful and big tourist destinations. And I think there's been some campaigns from the WA government to encourage more Australians to visit Broome and the Kimberley with discounted fares and things like that. But it'll be fascinating to see how many more of these regional airports, which you might not consider as first tier international destinations, start to get more flights in from overseas.
Yeah, I completely agree. Right, what are we going to talk about next?
So what we should talk about next, speaking of international companies bringing things into Australia.
Tenuous, but go on. Bringing things into Australia.
Yeah,
right.
cargo. We've got Emirates. So Emirates, who provided us with these lovely new planes for our fleet, have also launched their Courier Express service into Australia.
This sounds like something I want to have to talk about, isn't it?
In part, I was also there at the media event last week, but you can start us off.
Yeah, so basically, Emirates, I think it was 4 or 5 months ago now, kind of globally launched what they call Sky Courier service.
This is Courier Express.
Courier Express,
that's
it, Courier Express. So basically, the idea is that traditionally, if you send, packages abroad or to another country, it has to go through a number of different kind of hubs on the way, which takes a lot of time and in theory makes it kind of less secure, particularly if you're sending something important. So Emirates' idea is, why not basically, have a package which is kind of driven right to the airport, that goes on the aircraft, and then as it lands is driven straight to the destination. So it's kind of like point-to-point travel. And they had the idea that they've got all of these aircraft flying all around the world, so they have the capability to make this kind of courier service work. And they also have a clientele as well, because obviously they have a lot of business and first class customers that are the sort of people that might want to pay a big premium to make this work. So I think they launched this initially in 7 countries. I think it wasn't April the 1st, actually. But basically now...
Yeah, I think we commented on it at the time, because it was it seemed like an April Fool's joke, and they had the picture of the A380 parked in the suburban street with a flight attendant carrying a package. But it was real.
Yeah, so they've obviously, this has gone quite now, and now they've rolled it out to Australia. I think it's going to 4 Australian cities.
Yeah, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth, Sydney. And these are the direct services that are coming in from Dubai. And the idea is that, instead of, as you say, all these hubs all over the world in, Hong Kong and Singapore and wherever, and Johannesburg and London, wherever else, that the hub for the Courier Express service is in Dubai. So all of the flights come in through Dubai, and all the flights go out through Dubai, and from there they can be handed over to sort of local distribution partners. In this case, in Australia, it's Team Global Express. So they have signed on with Team Global Express for that last mile delivery, or to take packages, because Team Global Express obviously has its own fleet of aircraft. It's been adding, I think, some converted 737 freighters from memory. That may be someone else, but so they've been adding some planes to their fleet, and they will take it to destinations that Emirates doesn't go to in Australia, which I think is the idea. But yeah, they've been bringing in some 737 freighters. So that's one thing that they've been doing. I think there's other freighter companies that are doing that as well. But getting back to all of this, it's essentially the idea that, and it's not a bad idea either. I mean, if you're an airline with a central hub, and you've got a giant fleet of passenger aircraft, particularly ones with massive holds like the A380 here, why not use some of that cargo space to carry packages and open up a new line of business and new revenue stream.
It's a really innovative idea because, as I said before, Emirates have kind of got everything to make it work, but also it's almost like a simple core idea that the less distribution centers you have and the less people that are handling that package, the less likely it is to go wrong. So you're effectively going to have somebody drive it to the airport, then you're going to have it on the plane, then you're going to have somebody do that kind of last mile delivery. I would imagine if Emirates can make this work, you will see other airlines try and attempt this as well. But nonetheless, the fact they've rolled it out so quickly from their initial 7 locations to Australia suggests it's actually quite a good idea and it's going quite well.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed that it can sort of expand more across Australia, and we'll have to see how it goes. Hopefully we won't get any A380s landing on suburban cul-de-sacs, though.
No, that would be pretty bad, wouldn't it? Right, what's up next?
Well, Adam, we should probably address the Huey.
Yes, and I was wondering when that was going to happen. Can you start off, and you can do one of your kind of, you do that movie voice thing, or like a trailer voice. You could be like previously on the Huey, and we can chop that up, put that on Instagram. We'll keep on beating the other podcast. Go on.
Previously on Australian Aviation. Last month, our Huey Award for
controversially
the most we got a whole zeros of emails about it, but last month we gave the Huey Award for most reliable airline, which is decided based on the BITRA data that comes out every month. And this is for domestic airlines, of course. But previously, we awarded the Huey Award to the entire sector.
This is for on-time performance.
For on-time performance, because the entire sector had, for 2 months in a row, gone above the long-term averages for on-time arrivals, on-time departures, and cancellations. It went below the long-term average for cancellations. So it was better than the long-term averages, basically, because you want cancellations to be lower. So last month, the award went to the entire sector for that accomplishment. Now, it has slipped back below the long-term averages this month, which I suppose you could probably expect. There will be fluctuations, and I think June had a lot of wild weather.
So just to recap, now we're not glossing over that. You gave a Huey to the whole industry,
yes,
and in response, the whole industry standards lowered. It's a damning indictment, I would say, of the reputation of the Huey Award.
Well, I'd say it's an indictment.
You know what's happened? Their performance has gone back in time.
Yeah, there we go.
I liked it.
Yeah,
go on, yeah. So they threw Matt back.
I mean,
you
are hip to be square, Adam. So the Huey Award last month went to the whole sector, and the fact that there has been a decline in standards is probably more of an indictment of the sector itself than of the Huey Award, because they've sat on their laurels. They thought, right, well, that's it, we've got the Huey, job done. Yeah. But in fairness, there was quite a bit of wild weather around last month.
Yeah, that's true.
We had those days of heavy rains and winds, and so that has affected performance. But we do have the BITRA results, and for the first time in more than half a year,
6 months, yeah,
Qantas Group has beaten Virgin for on-time performance. So according to the BITRA data, 81.2% of QF services, so that's Qantas and QantasLink, departed on time, 84.4% arrived on time. That is compared to 78.7% departing and 78% of arriving for Virgin services. That's Virgin and Vara. This is the first time since December last year that Qantas has overall been more reliable than Virgin. However, Virgin did still beat Qantas on cancellations. Oh, no, excuse me. The first time since November last year.
That's a long time, actually.
It's a long time. Virgin has had a pretty good run at the top of the leaderboards. Virgin still beat Qantas on cancellations. 1.6% of Virgin flights cancelled compared to 3.5% of Qantas flights. Shout out, by the way, one to Jetstar. Jetstar performed comparatively well in June. 78.1% on-time departures, 79.6% on-time arrivals, 1.1% cancellations. Jetstar was the third lowest for cancellations above, it had 1.1, Hinterland 0.4, and Vara, by the way, no cancellations again.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Now, Vara didn't perform too well in other areas. In on-time arrivals and on-time departures, Virgin and Rex were kind of sitting together. But Qantas domestic actually was right at the top of the pack, just behind Hinterland. Hinterland always a strong performer, but at the top of the pack, 83.2% on-time arrivals, 85% on-time departures for Qantas domestic, and 2.8% cancellations. So Qantas has toppled Virgin. Virgin has been philosophical about it.
So they gave you a statement? That's quite nice of them, to be fair, because they could have said, we don't want to give you a statement. So it's fair play to them for doing that. Go on.
So, from Qantas, Ben Holland, the head of the Integrated Ops Centre at Qantas, said, our domestic on-time performance in recent months has been at its highest level since 2019, and this is a credit to the thousands of Qantas team members who deliver for our customers every day. Meanwhile, Virgin's Chief Operating Officer, Chris Snook, did point to the 98.3% completion rate, which is still very good.
Yeah.
And he said, quote, for the first 6 months of the year, our average on-time performance rate of 82.1% and average completion rate of 98.1% were the highest of the major Australian airlines. He said this result reflects the strength of our operational planning and the dedication of our teams across the network. And he said, although we may not lead the on-time rankings every month, our focus remains firmly on delivering a stable and reliable operation while continuing to provide great value and choice for Australian travellers.
Nicely done by the comms team. That was well handled, because no one else is asking them for this quote apart from Jake. So yeah, no, thank you for doing that.
And it's Virgin has still been doing very, very well this year. Yeah. And like they said, they're not going to be leading the table every month, but it's been a heck of a run for them. Half a year at the top.
It's been a very good run.
But it has a run that is a streak that's come to an end. And so the Huey Award for this month, and what will be more controversial probably than awarding it to the whole sector, knowing how our respondents can be, goes to Qantas.
Qantas, well
Congratulations,
done,
Qantas for winning the Huey Most Reliable Airline for the month of June.
So I would say, this is probably the highest achievement of Vanessa's time as
Absolutely,
CEO.
Absolutely.
So
I don't know how many.
Around.
I don't know how many of the Australian Aviation Awards that Qantas has entered. But the Huey Award.
Do they get a replica to put on their shelf? Do you send them one? I don't know.
No.
No. Okay.
I just see if they're listening, then they can listen to it. A strong and tautological statement from me. The Huey Award, far more prestigious than any of the individual Australian Aviation Awards, that's for sure. Maybe on par with the Excellence Award.
Yeah, the Australian Aviation Award. What is to say tautology?
Tautological.
Tautological, what does that mean?
It's basically where you say the same thing twice in a different way.
Okay.
A tautology is... I'll get you some other examples if you like. Tautology, the saying of the same thing twice over in different words. Sorry, in different words, generally considered to be
definitely different
worlds. So if you say one thing on Earth and then you go to Mars and say another thing, that's tautology. But they arrived one after the other in succession, for example, says Google, because that means the same thing.
It's quite a highbrow moment from a show which is essentially just
we live to expand our listeners' vocabulary. Yes, congratulations to Qantas for achieving the pinnacle of achievement in the Australian aviation sector, the Huey Award for Most Reliable Airline.
So we had the unveiling of the Huey Award, which has gone back to Qantas after a long time of Virgin dominance. We're in the final section of the show now, Jake. What are we talking about next?
Maybe some less good news for Qantas because there's been more aftermath from the hack attack.
Yeah, the hack attack.
The scattered spider.
The scattered spider, yes.
Now, you've had a couple of stories on this. They've got an injunction to prevent the release of the hacked data, and there's also, and this is from our colleague Grace, from one of the many other fine Momentum Media titles. Apparently, Maurice Blackburn is launching a new class action.
Yeah, so it was Maurice Blackburn were the kind of the legal firm who were responsible for dragging Qantas through the courts for their decision to what was now illegally fire or get rid of the roles of what is it?
One could argue was always illegal.
Was always illegal, yes. All of 1,800 kind of outsourced kind of ground handlers and other people. And they were the ones that kind of doggedly dragged them through the courts and eventually kind of forced Qantas to pay $120 million in compensation. Maurice Blackburn always seemed to be the legal firm that are kind of going for Qantas. And obviously they scored back a huge legal victory a year or so ago. Now they have, perhaps opportunistically, opened up it is a class action for all Qantas customers that you have been affected by this. Now, they basically say it's early days. They just want people to register their interest. But they've already kind of steamed in and effectively accused Qantas of being kind of negligent with customer data. So obviously they're hoping that, millions of people sign up and make this a very big class action. I personally think this is a little bit unfair and it feels a little bit opportunistic to do this when we still don't really know the finer details of this. And as we spoke about last week or a couple of weeks ago when we had David Hollingsworth, shout out to David, from Cyber Daily on our podcast.
It's Hollingworth.
Hollingworth.
There's just the one Holling.
Just the one. Wow, I look really disrespectful now, don't I? Sorry, David. But basically, the point he was making is it's kind of
I'm sure he forgives you, Mr. Thorns.
But the point he was making is it's kind of like it's not if but when you kind of eventually get hacked. It's kind of almost going to happen to all companies. The Scatter Spider group, they're kind of masters of manipulation because as well as doing all the computer wizardry, they will get people on the phones and they will kind of trick them into divulging information that they can then use to aid with their hack. This has happened to lots of major airlines all around the world. He also said in his experience, which I do agree with, that Qantas have actually handled this thing very, very well. So we've been very quick at contacting all affected passengers and telling them exactly what bits of data, have been compromised. They've done everything they can to keep people informed. I do feel this is slightly unfair on Qantas, and it does feel that if Qantas hadn't had such a tough last few years, people wouldn't be going in for the kill as much as they are. And as well, as Qantas would say in response, there was no financial information, no credit card information or debit card information has been stolen. So it's things like emails and phone numbers, etc., which, while that isn't ideal, I would say isn't necessarily a very dangerous thing that's happened. Nonetheless, though, Maurice Blackburn are kind of going for them again. I do think that's a little bit unfair.
And they've got this injunction as well to prevent the release of the hacked data.
So this is quite interesting. So basically what happens, they go to a court and they get a kind of almost a preemptive injunction. And what this means is if someone were to get hold of these details, if they were to, they would potentially be banned from publishing them. And if any media outlet or organisation or individual were to publish them, they could effectively kind of face jail time. It's a criminal offence. Now, you would like to think that would kind of happen anyway, but it's almost like another set of protection that Qantas has been put in place. Now, obviously, there's a balance here in between kind of allowing the media to report on things and also protecting people's kind of information and stopping further issues. But nonetheless, this is actually quite a common case that's happened. David pointed to an example that happened this time last year. So that is a kind of common course of events. So it does feel that Qantas are actually quite on the ball with trying to take charge of the situation.
Yeah, it does. I have been wondering if my phone number has been part of those because I have been receiving very annoying group texts.
Who are you from?
Spammers.
Yeah, what kind of spammers?
Spammers saying, "Oh, there's you've got 40 days to pay a penalty," or "Oh, your package is arriving," or some other the kind of horse apple that spammers usually send you.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that my data hasn't been. I haven't gotten any emails from Qantas about it, but I'm hoping that my mobile phone number hasn't been leaked because that would be very annoying.
But you're a journalist, so your number would be with loads of people.
That's true, but it only has really started in the past couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think you're all right. Yeah, you'll be fine.
So, I mean, I like half the country have a Qantas frequent flyer account, so we'll have to
I thought
see.
you were more of a Velocity.
I have one of each.
Okay.
One of each.
Nice.
Because you never know when you're going to be called to fly on Qantas or Jetstar or whatever.
All right, nice. Okay, excellent. Always talking about and chatting about. I kind of felt that never really spiraled into what we hoped it would spiral to. The whole hack chat. I mean, I did a very good job in talking about it.
That's good.
You did an exceptional job.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Here's another one for you, Adam.
Oh God. What am I talking about next?
Talking about NASA.
NASA. What about them?
And a supersonic plane.
Yeah. This is actually really interesting. It sounds like I'm not saying interesting stuff normally. This is
Supersonic planes.
right.
Boring.
So basically, 18 months ago, NASA unveiled for the first time a kind of prototype. I say it's a prototype. It's actually quite a large demonstrator version of what they call the X-59. So this is a supersonic aircraft that, in theory, doesn't create a sonic boom or creates a very quiet sonic boom. So as probably everybody knows, when you pass the sound barrier, when you go past Mach 1, it causes a sonic boom, which if you happen to be flying over a residential area, could, possibly cause, glasses to shatter and dogs to yelp and all sorts of chaos. And because of that...
The loudest sky kitten of all.
The loudest sky kitten of all, right? So, and because of that, supersonic aircraft that aren't military aircraft are basically banned from flying over essentially residential areas when they're at supersonic speeds. And this is one of the things that contributed to the demise of Concorde. And it's certainly been one of the reasons why nobody's, or certainly not too recently, nobody's really ever attempted to create a new Concorde. NASA's idea is that they've kind of redesigned, they've rethought the shape of the aircraft so that the kind of cockpit effectively is kind of almost, I think it's a third of the way down the aircraft, and it has a very, very long and pointy nose. And the theory goes that if you fly at supersonic speeds, this kind of get-up will kind of disperse and I'm bodging with science here, it will disperse like the sound waves or whatever that will cause the boom and will stop it happening. Now, NASA have worked on this with Lockheed Martin, and they were initially due to start flying it and actually trialling it at the end of last year. That didn't happen. We didn't really hear much about it for a long time. They now seem to have got this thing back on track. So what it's doing now is starting taxi testing, and they're going to build it up and build it up and build it up until it's kind of taxiing at the speed almost of when it's going to take off, and then they're going to stop it. But that once they get through that test, they can then move to actually flying it. Now their next kind of plan is they're going to fly it over kind of selected residential areas, and then basically talk to the residents about what impact or not is felt. They've also done a lot of testing. I think it's been in Japan as well, using smaller versions of it in kind of wind tunnels, etc. Obviously, they're pretty certain that if they can make this thing work, there'll be no sonic boom. But I suppose it's only until you get it in the air that you will actually know. The problem with this is at the moment, the actual aircraft only has room for one passenger, one person, a pilot, and that person effectively doesn't have a great view, or I don't think they have any view of kind of outside the aircraft. So it's all done through a series of cameras. So the challenge would be, how do you take that design and change it into something that could be a commercial aircraft? Now, experts say that this is possible if they can now this design, then it is possible to adapt it. Some people think that you could see potentially a kind of commercial prototype in the air by, say, 2035. So we're maybe 10 years away. But nonetheless, this is NASA attempting to do something that hasn't really been done before. There are other companies that are working on kind of smaller supersonic aircraft, I think all of whom kind of claim to have quietened down the sonic boom a little bit, but nobody if it's able to do it on the scale that NASA are promising. NASA say that effectively the boom would be the equivalent of the sound of a car door slamming shut. So very, 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 very minor. But nonetheless, this potentially is a huge breakthrough to come. Whew, got away with that. That's good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how this ends up developing.
Absolutely.
Now we've had this is something that we might not normally sort of talk about, because it is sort of a intended as a plug for the Australian Aviation Summit, but we've had some comments on this article about the operations manager at RMIT Aviation Academy has been saying that aviation isn't glamorous anymore. And that it's not as attractive as a career, and this is something that the sector needs to address.
And I think that's very, very true. So one of the problems, and I've spoken candidly at events about this before, is that the aviation industry, people might not like to hear it on this show, got a very, very bad rep during COVID. Understandable. If you stand down, airlines off and on for 2 years, if you make all of these people redundant, if there's talk about how the kind of working conditions for both crew and pilots and everyone involved in the ecosystem isn't as good as it used to be, then you've got a serious issue. Now, in this country at the moment, and in fact all around the world, we have a kind of long-term lack of pilots, lack of engineers, maintenance professionals, etc. And at the moment, we're at the point where it's not quite stopping aircraft taking off, but it's going to soon if we don't really do something. And so the point is that this industry has a bit of a kind of reputational issue. The other issue is as well that we've got all of these new sectors that are starting up. You've got AI and SaaS and all these kind of things. This is where a lot of those kind of STEM professionals, engineers, potentially people that would become maintenance professionals, this is maybe one of the sectors they're going to go into. Similarly as well, for pilots, it might seem ridiculous, but actually you saw during COVID A380 pilots go and become drone pilots. Now, this might seem silly, but you may just think of a drone as being a little thing that you fly around and take a photo. Actually, Hollywood needs major drones and really talented pilots to do it. So there's actually more competitions from exciting industries than there perhaps wasn't 20, 30 years ago. So the point they're making is that actually aviation has to do a lot to kind of increase its reputation after those COVID years. Certainly a lot of young people that went through COVID, maybe they were in their late teens, early 20s, that were considering a career in aviation, may have been spat out the other end of that crisis and thought, well, actually, I've got second thoughts about it. So the industry as a whole needs to do a lot more to encourage young people and not just assume that there's all of these kind of av geeks ready to go into the industry. We speak to lots of people that say, I went to a air show and I saw the fighter jet flying overhead, and I was really excited about it. Those people probably are always going to go in the industry. We need to also reach the people who maybe aren't super excited about it, and we need to get them in too. We talk about commercial aviation there, but you've also got an issue too. The RAF supposedly, or so the rumours go, actually are struggling to get hold of fighter pilots, struggling to find people of the calibre to do it. This is a kind of international issue as well. So aviation as a whole needs to think really, really carefully about how it's going to fix this. I think I read a story a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, about how the RAF launched this brilliant kind of almost Christopher Nolan-esque kind of trailer and campaign where they talk to people to almost think differently about what a career in the air means. So I think this is definitely an industry-wide issue.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because we if you haven't heard the premium podcast that we put out a couple of weeks ago about air services and this Airport 24/7 documentary that went behind the scenes at Melbourne Airport, we had a chat with Mel and Keith, who are an air traffic controller and an aviation rescue firefighter, respectively, and they were sort of saying that they hadn't had a lot of interest in the aviation sector beforehand. I mean, Keith always wanted to be a firefighter, but he hadn't initially considered aviation rescue firefighting. And, Mel hadn't really considered being an air traffic controller. But I think her father was an ATC or something like that. She was a player in the VFL for a while, the Victorian Football League. But she came into air traffic control. And so it's interesting to think maybe people don't want or haven't seen a lot of interest or haven't experienced a lot of interest in going into the aviation industry. But once you show them the opportunity and show them what's there.
Yeah. It also sounds like a really basic thing to say, but maybe 50, 60 years ago, aviation was deemed as something almost more exciting than it's deemed now. So when people say to me, why do plane spotters get excited when they see an aircraft in the sky? And the reason is that I say you, but if the average person looks up at the sky, they just see an aircraft. Somebody that's really into aviation, they see a feat of engineering genius, one of the greatest things that's ever been created.
Well, we've when I spoke to Jeb Brooks, the aviation YouTuber, a couple of years ago, who's still doing his aviation videos, by the way. But he was saying, he used to be like a consultant or something, and he was at a depressing conference at near an airport or something, and he walks out to get fresh air, and he sees a giant plane flying from overhead, touching down on the I think it was at San Francisco or something. It's like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And you've said a few times that and we've had people who, I lived under flight paths, and that's how I got involved. And the bloke from TAA that we spoke to, who was the commander who was in charge of Darwin during Cyclone Tracy, he was saying that there was a plane that sort of came down or something near my house, or landed somewhere near my house, and that got me involved with aviation. And so it's also interesting, if you go on YouTube, you can look at like BBC archives of, back in the early days of aviation.
You can totally do a BBC voice. That's coming. Go on.
So, talking about the comet can take you from London to Tokyo in just a matter of days, whereas before it would have taken months by ship. Or on Blue Peter, there was an episode of.
Do you know Blue Peter?
I know of Blue Peter,
Yeah,
but there was like an episode of Blue Peter that you can see a clip from it on YouTube where we're going to London Airport to see what it would be like to fly from London to Detroit. All of the steps you need to go through to get onto the plane. And so, and afterwards she was like, and all of this, I can fit all of this in these clothes and everything in my luggage and take it with me. Where back in the old days, I would have had to pack a giant trunk, which would not have fit on that Vickers jet, that sort of thing. And so, back in the days, there was a lot more romance. Back in the day, there was a lot more romance to aviation than there is now. But just because that romance is gone doesn't mean that the interest can't be rekindled. It's still an amazing industry, and experiencing the miracle of flight. People fly for the first time, they get rounds of applause from the cabin crews if it turns out this is your first time flying, and it's become mundane, but in a lot of ways, it really, really isn't.
No, it's still an absolutely extraordinary thing. And I think as well, what you will see, even though we're probably looking more to commercial aviation, this kind of the change in technologies you will get with things like drones will start to get people more excited about flight again. We are hopefully going to see this next generation of eVTOLs, I've always say it wrong, electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. Basically, we're going to see, battery-powered aircraft fly shorter distances. We're going to see potentially hydrogen-powered aircraft flying around.
New supersonic aircraft.
So we are on the cusp of a kind of revolution, and you can make a very good argument. For the last 40, 50 years, aviation hasn't necessarily revolutionised that much, at least in the minds of the general public. They would see the introduction of a jet engine, and they don't see anything else. Obviously, you've had things like the Dreamliner, new materials that make aircraft, but nonetheless, to the average punter, it all looks like business as usual. We're on the brink of this kind of revolution coming our way, and it's important for all of aviation to kind of take advantage of that in the next 10, 15 years to get more people on board. As I say, the sort of people that might want to become pilots, that might want to become engineers, are the sort of people that are going to be dragged into industries like AI and SaaS and computer games and all that kind of stuff. So we have more things to compete with than we did previously. But nonetheless, I think there's this big opportunity coming our way with new technology to get people excited.
Yeah, if by the way you watch that BBC video on how the comet can take you from England to Japan in a matter of days, best not to dwell on the fact that the comet featured in that video was one that very spectacularly crashed a few months after the video was shot.
Excellent
because of course the early comets were prone to metal fatigue.
Yeah, no. Okay. Right, well, we can't end the show on that, on crashing comet metal fatigue. Have you got anything else you can pull out of your back pocket?
A note of congratulations to Paul Bennett of Paul Bennett Air Shows.
Yes.
He's going to be performing at the world's biggest air show, the Oshkosh Air Venture, I believe it is. Just let me pull that up to double check. But that's in Wisconsin. Yeah, he will be at EAA Air Venture Oshkosh in Wisconsin, which normally regularly attracts more than 600,000 people and 10,000 aircraft, and he's going to be putting on performance. He's the first Australian pilot to be asked to perform at Air Venture Oshkosh, so we wish him all the best. And, of course, all the best to Paul Bennett Air Show's fellow pilot, Glenn Collins, on his continued recovery after Avalon.
Yeah, excellent. Right, okay, that sounds like a nice way to wrap it up. Right, okay, I'll wrap the show up then. I expect you to jump in and say something, but you're not doing it, are you? No, you're just doing this on purpose now. Right, I will say goodbye, farewell, whatever, to my co-host, Jake Nelson. Jake, thank you, blah, blah, blah.
Goodbye, Adam.
And we'll be back on the show the same time next week. But for now, for me and Jake, goodbye.
Goodbye.